to the second segment of Family Album. In January, we talked with Gloria Mezikovsky of Wakefield, and today we have with us Ed Harding. Ed is the co-owner of HD Physical Therapy on North Avenue, and he just celebrated his 5th anniversary. And now we're leading up to Father's Day, and we thought that Ed would be a great interview for that occasion because he has an interesting story to tell about his own family and his children. Ed was born in Malden, but he spent a great deal of his childhood in Wakefield at the home of his beloved meme. Her name is Mary Jo Celebresi, and Ed has very fond memories of being downtown in the Wakefield area and very fond memories of his grandparents. So today we want to talk with Ed about his family and about his unusual circumstances on how he became a father. So here we are, Ed. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking with us about your family. And so tell us about how you met your wife. Her name is Ellen?
Yes, it's Ellen Sangalang. Her married name, or her maiden name was Sangalang. Obviously, she's Ellen Harding now. Ellen and I have I would say, a fairly traditional story as far as like how we met. We were, in our like late 20s, early 30s. I was graduating from college. We had happened to meet in a few different, met at a campground. We were chatting online for a bit. She had come down my way to watch my graduation, to be part of that. And just through the years of us doing that, we started a bond, spent some more time together. I started to take some trips up to Maine. And, then we decided, we were going to move forward with our relationship. And
isn't that wonderful? So this year you'll be celebrating how many years, Ed?
So this October will be our 12th year of marriage.
Wonderful. Happy
12 wonderful years, by the way. Thank you very much.
What was that?
12 wonderful years, by the way.
Excellent. I like to hear that. Happy marriages make me happy.
Good.
Good. So you married Ellen.
I did.
And that was about 12 years ago, pretty soon. And like most couples, you thought you might like to start a family.
Yeah, for myself, I've always wanted to be a dad, so I think that was a big impact. And knowing that Ellen's passion to want to be a mother was one of the areas that we really connected on. So, that was one of the grounds that we agreed upon. We agreed upon how we wanted to, potentially get on that road and raise a family and the whole bit. So, we're really excited, once we're married, to start down the endeavor, the trail of trying to get married and trying to get pregnant and have children. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, what happened?
Yeah, I think, out of the gate, we had tried just like any couple, I think. I don't know if we ever planned a specific date to try to get pregnant. We just kind of went our way. We're happily married, doing what we do. And then, just throughout time, we started to realize that the pregnancy was not happening for Ellen. So we were trying really hard. It started to get to the point that we started to maybe put a little bit of pressure on, trying to conceive and, picking dates and picking times and trying to understand the cycles of when the best time to do that is. And, as we kept going on that road, we still had some difficulty getting pregnant. With no success, we started to seek out alternative methods. So,
well, that can be very frustrating for couples who desperately want to be parents. And when it doesn't happen, it sets up sort of a disappointment. But the disappointment goes deeper than a normal disappointment. And then frustration sets in. But today, with all kinds of new methods available to people who want to become parents, they take different routes. What did you and your wife do?
Yeah, we had tried a couple different routes. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really difficult for me to speak on behalf of my wife in the sense of how difficult that must have been for her on trying to get pregnant and conceive. Because, from my perspective, it's not anything. As much as I shared those feelings with her, she had her own sense of, being either upset or torn between trying to make that happen. But we had we were looking for a fertility clinic. We had looked at different times to try to conceive. We were trying many different methods that way. We had tried the hormone injections that my wife was doing for a while. So upon, multiple different efforts across different paths, for whatever reason, after all the different cycles of some of the hormone injections we were doing, nothing had been successful, nothing had been working, and just by the grace of God, we were blessed with Ellen getting pregnant. So through all those efforts, we ended up one day, Ellen had, called me at the office and said, guess what, we're pregnant, and we were beyond relieved, so it was amazing. But it was a long journey. We probably had tried, for a couple years, really trying to conceive, and it was something we both really wanted. A lot. So
I can appreciate that. There's nothing like the love between a parent and a child. Nothing quite like it.
What made it really unique is really early on in the process of us getting pregnant. I remember my wife was reading an article or talking to a doctor or wherever she got the information from. I think, she started to, because we were looking for all these different ways to try to get pregnant, she had read a study or an article that said, depending on the hormone level or some of the hormones in the blood, that can dictate whether or not you're pregnant with multiples or not. So but we hadn't even gone down that road, and I thought it was really weird that she would bring that up, and I says, well, I was like, why is that important? And she goes, because I think I might be pregnant with more than one child.
Oh, really?
Yes.
My goodness. Well, so was she?
Well, the funny part about it is when she said that to me, I completely brushed it off. So I completely bucked and resisted the mother's intuition, because I said, Ellen, there's no way that you are going to know that you have multiple children. I mean, you're pregnant, we're excited, we read studies, we traveled down this path, we're eliminating barriers, and all of a sudden now we're pregnant with multiple children. I was like, we haven't even seen the doctor yet, we haven't had blood tests yet, none of that's gone on yet. So it was really kind of unique that my wife would have that kind of weird mother, and I can't speak to that sensation or that feeling, obviously, not being a mother, but she had brought that up to me, and immediately I just didn't think it was, none of that was real whatsoever until we had our first meeting with the doctor in our first ultrasound.
And then what happened?
So even though the first meeting wasn't like that, the first ultrasound was probably the moment that everything started to unveil itself to ourselves and how excited we were as far as the pregnancy. So we went into the doctor's office, I took a day off of work, we head down, we're gonna do our first ultrasound, and I, obviously as new parents, you never know what these ultrasounds are like. I had never been in that before. I mean, Ellen was a little nervous, I didn't know what to expect. We go in the office, I'm just overly excited that, we have these, we're pregnant, this is great, I'm gonna be a dad, we're gonna be a mom, we have a family. And then, the doctor goes in, there was a woman actually doing the ultrasound, and she scans over. So, obviously, she's not very, she wasn't very far along yet. So, they kind of pull her shirt up and they're moving around with the ultrasound head, and they just brush over one little area. And the woman says, oh, do you see right there that, that's one of the babies? And I was like, oh, that's fantastic, look at that.
One of the babies?
Well, that's what she said. And I was like, and I didn't pick up on it when she said one at first. So at first she said one, and then she started to scan and move the ultrasound head over, and then she was like, and there's the other baby. And I was like, wait, I was like, two babies? And she kind of looked at us and she scanned over and she was like, and she goes, there's another baby.
Oh,
and I was like, oh my goodness, you gotta be kidding me right now. So, and again, I mean, they're doing an ultrasound. I mean, being a physical therapist, and I deal with medical equipment, sometimes you can get false readings, you move stuff around, maybe it's not accurate, I don't know. I mean, now it's like 3 babies, I think, I don't even know what's going on at this point. Like, who knows? And she scans over and finds a fourth separate sac, which was amazing. So at that point, 4, then I expect her to say, no, hold on a second. Now that I'm looking at it, it's only 1 or maybe 2. But to our great surprise, and unbelievably so, she was pregnant with 4.
Well, how did the pregnancy progress?
Not having any experience with that, and previously, I would say the first few months are fairly normal. We knew that she was pregnant with 4. We knew it was a high-risk pregnancy. So we started to interview doctors from some of the bigger hospitals in Boston, because we knew we wanted nothing but the best for my wife and for the children. And so we started to meet with Children's Hospital and Tufts Floating Hospital and Brigham and Women's. And I basically left it up to my wife's discretion. We met with all the high-risk pregnancy nurses, and I said, basically, whoever you feel most comfortable with, Ellen, is who we'll go with. And she chose Dr. Sabrina Craigo out of Tufts Floating Hospital in Boston. So that's where that kind of all started, was down there. And we went in and interviewed, and sat with the doctor, and she kind of gave us some of the ins and outs of being in a high-risk pregnancy, and that Ellen's at risk at, having a premature birth or, other types of risks that way. And to us, all that really meant at this point was we're going to have more frequent visits to the doctor, more often than maybe your typical pregnancy, because they just wanted to keep an eye on making sure everything was progressing along the right way.
So did it progress well? And was there a scheduled time when Ellen would deliver, or was she scheduled for a cesarean? How did that work out?
Yeah, so I think there was one day we were in the process of getting set up to be parents. So we had tried to set up the house a little bit, and when you're only 3 or 4 months into a pregnancy, you're just still trying to get stuff ready. You're trying to make room in the house. We went to Babies R Us. We were doing some various different things. And on one of our scheduled appointments, we decided we were going to get on and pick up some stuff for the house to get out of Babies R Us to get stuff set up. And we were on the way there, and she said, well, we got to go by the doctor's office and do our routine visit. In about 24 weeks gestationally, we went into Dr. Krego's office, and it looked like a fairly normal appointment. Ellen seemed to be doing fine. She wasn't reporting feeling any differently. And the doctor looked at Ellen at that moment and said, you're in preterm labor, and you're not leaving the hospital right now. And I think there were a few moments when you're in having multiple births that way that get really interesting. And I think I never really thought about some of the impact on what that was going to have on some of the decisions we're going to make moving forward. One of them, for example, is early on in the pregnancy, I remember the doctor asking us if we wanted to do selective reduction. And I had no idea what selective reduction was, just because I don't think my brain's ever thought that way. And that's not to knock selective reduction. I just never thought of it. And I remember saying to her, I didn't understand what she was asking me, and she kept asking me if I wanted to do selective reduction, and I didn't quite know what she meant until I started to really connect the dots. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, I see where you're going. We definitely don't want to do selective reduction. No. So that started to open up the can of worms of there are some big decisions that need to be made when you're in that process. So once Ellen goes back and they start talking about preterm labor, I'm keeping all this stuff in the back of your mind as far as is my wife going to be okay? Are the children going to be okay? There was a slight little taste of that when they said she was in preterm labor. But once they admitted her and you're in the room and all the doctors start coming in, you feel like everything goes from 0 to 100 miles an hour in the blink of an eye. Because I felt like a second ago we were going to Babies R Us. Now my wife's laying down and the doctors are all rushing in, and they're all worried about, where Ellen's at with the progression of her labor.
And this went way beyond worrying about, we have to have 4 cribs, we have to have 4 infant seats, we have to have several changing tables, and all those other things. This was a matter of life itself.
I think if you were to jumble up all the things about being pregnant and potentially being a parent and shake them all up and dump them on the table like a bunch of Legos, I think that's basically the order in which all of our things went. Nothing went the way I would think it would go in the order in which it should have went in. So you don't plan on going into preterm labor at 24 weeks. That's way too soon for that to happen. And then once you're in preterm labor and the doctor comes back and now Ellen's laid up on a table, I haven't even thought about where 3 kids are going to stay in my house yet, or where, we haven't even gone through part of the process as far as to your point. We need 3 cribs, we need 3 diaper champs, we need 3 of everything, just because we were still so early on in the pregnancy. I think we were still getting used to we're pregnant. There was still some of that excitement going on. So to then have that escalate like that was, really, it just kind of took us by surprise.
I would imagine that you would go into some sort of a overdrive and just feel a little bit numb through the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a weird sensation. I think my wife and I speak to the 2 of us directly, even though I know my extended family all had, emotions and feelings tied to it as well, because these are the first grandchildren of the family on top of that. So, there was some excitement just in the sense that Ellen's pregnant. It's the first time we're pregnant. And, everyone's really excited to kind of keep the news on the update and what was going on. So we went in, I think it sent a shockwave across the family, as far as what's going on. None of us were exposed to any multiple pregnancies or preterm labors or anything like that. So when we went in there, I remember probably the toughest moment of the experience and the joy of all of it is that moment when Dr. Krego would come in, because I'm I've been in the healthcare world now for 13 or 14 years, and I'm very much used to communicating about difficult diagnoses or various different things and trying to leave the emotional side out, especially when I'm the care provider and I'm treating a patient, because everyone kind of relates with their injuries or their ailments in different ways. So, you know, I try to just be as supportive as I can. And when the doctor had come in, I thought I'd be able to separate that emotion pretty well because I was talking about it, but it was really difficult for me to separate my emotions at that point. I remember when Dr. Crago had come in, the first thing she had done was sat next to me. And I think her sitting next to me immediately sent chills down my spine because it was almost like she was reaching down on a personal level to me and coming down, and then I felt like we were going to be delivered some pretty devastating news, but in still being scared of all that as well. So, I mean, on top of being afraid, the doctor's now sitting down next to me, and I feel like, you know, what's going to happen at this point? And I know my wife's laid up in bed, so she's looking, you know, in the same way I am and hoping, you know, depending on me to be there and try to understand what the doctor's about to say. And the doctor had, you know, at that point told us that, you know, at any given point that Ellen could deliver and the risks of that delivery. And I think initially when they tell you in the hospital, which I guess I could go back and forth as to which one I like more or not, I like the fact that they gave me a lot of information, but it's a lot of information to absorb and it gets really scary. But on that same breath, if you don't tell you that, I would not want to be surprised by some of those outcomes either. So it's kind of the, you know, the double-edged sword that way as to which way you like it. So, and I think everyone might prefer it differently. You know, hindsight being 2020, I'm glad that she went through and described a lot of the, you know, potential things that could have been and how that progressed and what was going to go on. So.
Well, tell us about the delivery itself.
Yeah, I think, you know, to describe some of the delivery, there's a whole process of Ellen being pregnant, which, you know, anytime I tell about how that kind of goes and where that is, the accolades and everything you can imagine, what every positive adjective you could think for a human being is usually how I describe my wife, especially the strength that she showed during this phase when Dr. Crago comes in. Because when Dr. Crago comes in and she sits next to me, it was the first time I've emotionally broken down in a very long time in front of, you know, probably the first time I ever really emotionally broke down in front of my wife. So the doctor had said that, you know, at this point, if Ellen were to deliver, that there was only a 50% chance that each one of the children were going to live. And upon them saying that, that was really difficult for me to hear. So it was probably the first time that I couldn't separate my emotions from my logical, practical, medical background thinking. And I didn't realize how much that was going to impact my wife at the moment, because when she said it, it was really difficult for me to keep my composure. So I had immediately broken down, you know, emotionally. I was visibly crying. I was having a tough time talking. I was having a tough time keeping it together. And I remember looking at Dr. Crago, and I mean, my specific words were, "Do you mean I have to flip a coin 4 times and get it right 4 times in a row?" And pretty much, you know, she affirmed that. So, you know, upon hearing that news, you know, you can just imagine how, you know, now there's just a whole new flood of emotions that go on that you're not really sure how to absorb or deal with that way.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. So, and that sent that shockwave to my wife. And that was probably the first time that I had understood the significance, in my opinion, of what being together as a couple or a friend or however you want to slice it, as far as depending on each other. Sorry. So at that moment, Ellen started to cry because I didn't realize how much she was depending on me not to get upset. And I don't think we ever really stated that, but I think in some breaths she relied on me for that. And I think some of my family rely on me for that, to make those decisions and to be, as most of my friends call me, kind of always happy-go-lucky, steady Eddie, whatever it may be. So a lot of my buddies make fun of me for it, but, you know, in a joking manner. You know, and then when Ellen broke down, she immediately had an asthma attack.
Oh my goodness.
So now I'm realizing the impact that I'm essentially having on my wife, right? So, and it was in that moment of my wife having an asthma attack, and they put her on oxygen, and now any stress upon her can escalate the pregnancy. So at this point, I'm like, hold on a second, we're 24 and a half weeks, and my emotions immediately became like, I became very focused on what needed to be done at the moment. And in that moment, I started to realize out of the two of us, as much as that may have been impacting me, I pretty much had the easiest job in the room. And the easiest job in the room was to just be there for my wife. I was not laid up in a bed. I was not on oxygen. She was the one that couldn't move, and she was just trying to nurture and care for these 4 kids in her belly. And that's when I started to realize, like, I can't break down and get upset like that in moments like this. She needs me to be calming and loving and whatever she needed at that moment, just an ear to listen to, head to, a shoulder for her head to rest on, whatever she needed that way. So I think that was a distinct moment for me where I started to, I guess, find comfort in the chaos of what was going to happen.
Absolutely.
By knowing that I understood what I needed to do. So.
So Ellen had the babies.
Yep.
Babies are not going to stay in there forever.
Babies are not going to stay in forever. At this point in our pregnancy, which is what we were hoping we were doing something completely different. Ellen was on an around-the-clock ultrasound check. So every 3 to 4 hours, they were coming in the room throughout the night, and they were doing an ultrasound check on all the children. And what they were doing is to making sure that their heartbeats were okay, their breathing rates were okay. They needed to make sure Ellen was doing okay. And I slept on a recliner, next to the bed. And it's funny how, I mean, growing up as a young kid in my 20s, probably like most average teenager in their early 20, young male, you could barely wake me up. I think you'd have to jump on top of me to actually wake me up. I used to set 3 alarm clocks. The minute you know that your wife and your children are, having some issues and they tell you they're going to do 3-hour ultrasound checks, my wife and I woke up, I think every time before the doctors came in, almost like our own biological clock knew when three hours was up. And it was to check every child. And they were referring to the children as baby A, baby C, baby A, baby B, baby C, and baby D. So that's how they were referencing the children. So every 3 hours they would go through and check baby A, and they'd say, good, baby A is okay, B, C, and D. And those are, the first handful are extremely scary because you don't know what to expect and you want everything to be okay. But you don't want to get too emotional and upset over. Try to take one step at a time, because that's about the best you can do, is put one foot in front of the other on each step. So that went on, and as we were doing that, we started to circle the dates on the calendar. And there was a calendar up, the whiteboards that they put in the hospital rooms, and we would either circle or write on it, because every day that went by that Ellen stayed pregnant, or the baby stayed in her belly, the chance of them surviving increased dramatically. So the ability for them to survive on every single day that went by. So it was almost like we woke up and were like, we are one more day, closer or further, or however, because closer to them being born, but further along as far as the pregnancy. So we did, there was a lot of back and forth that way. So for the next, I would say, week or week and a half, there was a lot that happened inside that week. But to kick off that week, it was all about the countdown.
Let's go now to January 26th, the day the babies made their grand entrance.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot that leads up to January 26th for my wife and I. On the baby A, B, C, and D side, we thought we knew the names of the children. We thought we knew we were going back and forth on names. So we initially said, you know what? We're tired of praying for baby A and baby B and baby C and baby D. And it's not that we're tired of praying for them. We're tired of praying for something that doesn't really exist, right? Baby A. It just doesn't sound right. Yes. So when we're praying for this, I don't feel like we're saying, please, baby A. So immediately upon that night, after months of indecisive names and looking at books and coming up with ideas, we said, within the next 5 minutes, we name all 4 children right now. So, and we were going to use the A, B, C, and D. So that's where that kind of started. And the funny part about it is we started with A, which was Adam. And when when Ellen said name, let's go for A, I said, oh, Adam sounds great. That's phenomenal. And she looked at me kind of weird, and she thought I was being funny. And I was like, no, I really like Adam. Doesn't it sound like Adam Harding? Like, I kind of like that. And she really thought, she's like, hon, I'm laid up in a hospital bed right now. I don't know why you're joking around. And I was like, I don't know why that's a joke. Like, I think that sounds perfect. Well, my cousin's name is Adam Harding. So hence why it sounded so great to me, which was fine. I was like, well, it kind of rolls off the tongue, right, because of the fact that Adam already exists. So needless to say, we had Adam Harding B was our daughter. We couldn't come out with Beth, Brittany. We're coming out with a few different names. Nothing really stuck. So we said, let's put baby B on the burner for a minute. Let's go to C, and we came up with Cameron for our baby C. And then baby D was our other boy, and we were thinking Doug, Dylan, Dan. And then we really couldn't decide, so my wife said, why don't you come up with the last baby, baby boy's name? And I like traditional biblical names, and I'm a traditionalist by nature anyway, so I said, how about Matthew? And she said, I love Matthew. So and then I said, in return, why don't you come up with our daughter's name, baby B? And then she came up with Madison, and I loved Madison. And then we made sure that the doctors and the staff would refer to them by their name. I didn't want to refer them anymore by baby B, baby C, and baby D, just due to the fact that I felt like we were an ultrasound check away from something, a complication happening. And I didn't want that. So, and I didn't know how far we were going to be able to make this pregnancy last. And then everything seemed fine. We had been in the hospital for almost a week. I was like, this is great. Pregnancy's going to be fine. They were projecting that everything was going to go good. I was going to go back to work. I said, that's wonderful. So first time in a week, or almost 2 weeks, I had been to work. I went to bed that night, and then I woke up probably about 3 in the morning, and my wife's water had broke. So that was really an interesting twist or spin on what the next few steps of the next few days kind of led to. So and waking up that morning, I had no idea what to really expect. So they said, oh, Ellen's water's broken. And I just always naturally assumed that meant you need to deliver the baby immediately as soon as the water breaks. So, that was kind of at that moment, we kind of got a little nervous again because I didn't know where we were at. We were kind of almost at the 25-week marker. Ellen's water broke. We kind of felt some sense of normalcy for a moment. I mean, as normal as you can with your wife laid up in a hospital with 4 babies in her belly, normalcy. And that's where that kind of started. And then, from there, we had many complications with Adam is really what who the water broke for was Adam, which baby A, who was the closest to coming out. So upon the water breaking, I think was just the start of probably a few days of a long journey for us to try to figure out what the right move was, moving forward. So, because the decision really became, and the decision got harder and harder as we moved on, because we had the right to basically tell the doctors in the hospital that we wanted to deliver. So the decision became between us and the doctors, when is the appropriate time to deliver the children? Mm-hmm. The water's broken, there's a chance of infection. They told us Adam could survive with his sac broken. That does happen. That's fairly, quote unquote, normal. But that would be fine. So every day that went by, the chances of the children surviving went up. But then there's a risk that we're putting towards Ellen and Adam because his sac is broken. So it became a little difficult to try to go back and forth. And not that anyone was looking for the ultimate decision.
Is that double-edged sword again?
It is, exactly. It becomes difficult to figure out what the right, and there's no book on that either.
No.
Can't read about that to decide what's going on. And no one's really, the doctors are good about not pushing you in a decision. You don't want to make the wrong decision, and then, as you're trying to make that and think about that, things continue to progress for Adam, probably in not such a good manner that way. I think, over the next 4 or 5 days with Adam, things got really difficult and complicated. And that's what made things, really difficult for my wife and I throughout that time frame because, he, exceeded to, start to, my wife continued to have that pregnancy progress and Adam was progressing. So Adam, for the most part, was ready to be delivered. And there were things happening that were kind of forcing him out and forcing him to, to want to be delivered that way. So we had, some prolapses where we had a scary moment, in that early process where Adam's umbilical cord started to protrude. And, during that time, the doctor had come in and did a quick assessment on Adam. And once his umbilical cord started to protrude, they increased the ultrasounds to every 2 hours around the clock. So, again, that was still really difficult. And all this is still really new for my wife and I. So neither one of us knew how to handle any of that. And at that point, I thought I had already decided that I wasn't going to get emotional. And the doctor had come in, and he had checked the umbilical cord, and he had said that we lost Adam. So
take your time now.
So then, once he had said we lost Adam, because he said he couldn't feel the heartbeat in the umbilical cord, my wife and I had had a moment alone to grieve for the loss of our son. Sorry. There's a happy ending to this, I swear, Gail. So at the end of the day, when that type of stuff happens, they have to call in the attending physician. And the attending physician had come in after my wife and I had been alone for a little while in the hospital room. We asked everyone to leave. We kind of shared a moment together. And the doctor had come in and did an ultrasound check and actually told us Adam was fine. And upon the check in the umbilical cord, the doctor that had come in to check it was wrong. He just couldn't feel the heartbeat. So now they checked the ultrasound, and now Adam has a heartbeat again. And I guess it wasn't that it was again, it was real. So I was like, hold on a second. Like, now you can imagine, like, we just went through this. We thought we lost our son, and then do an ultrasound check, and now Adam's alive, and all the children are doing fine, and Ellen was doing fine. So,
talk about a roller coaster.
right? So, I mean, you can imagine how we kind of felt during that moment, as far as, like, we thought we had lost our son at that moment, and we didn't. I think what continued to progress from there was then, once we go through that, now there's national conference calls going on. So the doctors were in conference rooms with us, and we were calling other hospitals around the country, and we were discussing, I mean, what do you do next? Adam, is in a risky situation. Ellen's in a risky situation. Do you deliver right then and there? Do you just immediately say, that's it, we're going to go into delivery and deliver? And then what type of risk does that put to the other 3 children, or Ellen or not? So we had some tough decisions to make at that point.
Did.
So
Certainly did. What did you finally decide to do?
Yeah, so once we were in there, I think the ultimate decision was really to take things day by day, or moment by moment, or hour by hour. I don't think it was literally day by day. I think it was more every couple hours we were talking about what the right decision was to make. And Adam continued to, his pregnancy continued to progress. So on top of a cord prolapse, there was a lot more of that was going on his end. So there was a point that, you could actually see his fingertips. And, I thought that would have been more emotional for me when I saw that, because there was so much of that emotional roller coaster that had been going on. But I also felt comforted that they were doing the ultrasound checks and things were okay. And the longer that we could keep the pregnancy, the greater the chance of the children surviving was. So it was we were really, somewhat comforted by that fact as well. So we decided that, along with the doctor's advice, it wasn't just like our decision that way. It was really based upon a lot of minds sitting together, that we could continue to keep Ellen in this state and to try to avoid the pregnancy from progressing as long as there was no sign of infection. So that's why we're doing ultrasound checks and checks on Ellen. So they said the second that we detect any type of spike in fever, any type of heartbeat elevation, any stress on any of the children, whatever it may be, no matter what decision we're making, we have to deliver immediately, because we can't risk the babies, we can't risk Ellen. So they said, we're just going to escalate and increase the amount of times we're going to do the ultrasound checks. So it literally became just more frequent that they were in the room around the clock all night long, which was just literally checked to make sure that Ellen's fever wasn't spiking, there were no signs of any type of infection, and thank goodness, it stayed that way for probably a few more days. So, that was great to know that I think, we were moving forward and at least feeling comforted by the fact that infection wasn't setting in, every day was going by. as normal as you could imagine it was, we were back to circling dates on the calendar to make sure we were one step further towards, keeping the babies in the oven per se, so.
keeping those babies baking.
Exactly, yes.
So January 26th came, and what kind of a day was that? Was it a cold, windy day, or?
You know what? Neither one of us had left the hospital in probably almost 2 weeks, so I could tell you what the color of the lights in the hospital were for 2 weeks straight and how uncomfortable the chair, but at the end of the day, we hadn't really been out much. I mean, this was an around-the-clock type of thing. I hadn't been to work. I mean, obviously, Ellen's laid up in bed. We're doing whatever we can. We have family coming in to say hello, to support as much as they can. But it was kind of a delicate state, because if you would come in the room and you would have hang with Ellen, you would think everything was normal. I mean, she was feeling fine. There were no issues, but, we were trying to make sure that those babies weren't going to come too soon. So January 26th rolled around. It was pretty early in the morning, and Adam's pregnancy had progressed a little bit more. And once it progressed to the point where, you could start to see part of Adam's arm. And once you could see that, the doctors were like, you know what, this is like, we just can't let it progress any further than this. I was like, even if infection's not setting in, Adam needs to come out. And part of the issue we had with that is Ellen wasn't dilated enough to really deliver Adam. So that was also part of the decision-making process we were making. How far along was she really? I mean, not just weeks and days and months, but dilation-wise, was she ready to deliver, these children? So once Adam had progressed to a certain point, the doctors had said, no conference calls are needed, no decisions are needed. At this point, we need to deliver, and we were all for it. We're like, you know what? We've made it as long as we did. It's up to God's hands now to just, hopefully, we're going to be blessed with these 4 beautiful children. We'll just continue to progress forward. So they brought Ellen down on January 26th into the OR. And, on the way down, they started to realize that, again, she wasn't dilated enough to deliver Adam. So the doctor had come to us and presented what they call an interval delivery process and asked if we would be interested in, in potentially exploring that avenue. And basically what that is they try to deliver 1 child naturally, or 2 children naturally in certain cases, and then try to not deliver the other children. So that's used in multiple bursts to try to keep them growing that way inside mama. So, we were all for it. I said that, that'd be fine. Whatever you think. The tricky part about that is they actually had to induce Ellen's labor, just due to the fact she wasn't dilated enough. So, I mean, the way the doctor described it is like pushing a bus down a hill and then trying to stop the bus when it's at the bottom of the hill. So, I mean, I don't know what that feels like, but, I mean, they were definitely, warning us that, as great as it all sounded, the likelihood was slim and it was extremely difficult to do. And it would have been a little bit easier if Ellen was a little bit more dilated to be able to deliver, but she wasn't far enough along to make that happen. So they induced her labor, and then upon that, they have to keep checking to make sure that she's dilated enough. All her vitals need to come into the right order. So there were a lot of things that their systems that they were checking and, making sure everything was, the stars are all aligned to make this happen. So they brought Ellen down, and they were doing, ultrasound checks, and then Ellen wanted an epidural. So upon delivering all that and getting ready to go, and they prepped the OR, because OR, when you go in, is really only prepared for 1 or 2 children. I'm now going to fill the whole OR with like 4 children, so there's a lot of prep that goes into that. And we were downstairs, and Ellen was ready to go. And right before we were going to go into the OR on January 26th, they did one last ultrasound check on all 4 children. So previous to that, everything was fine. And that is the moment that we lost Adam.
Oh, you lost Adam.
So they did that one last check on him, and he didn't quite make it that far. So
I'm so sorry.
I appreciate that.
But the other 3 babies did survive.
They
Madison, Cameron, and Matthew did survive. So they are now how old?
8 years old.
8 years old.
Yes.
But it hasn't always been smooth sailing, has it, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, I guess everything's relative.
Yes.
So I think comparatively speaking, as to what we were dealing with in the hospital, I thought I was willing to take on just about anything at that point, I was just, blessed to have, which I still am extremely happy and glad that we went down the road we did, and we have 3 wonderful children. But, it started, in the sense of just even the simple pregnancy side had started to get tough again too, because, now that Ellen's prepared and Adam's ready to go, we still have the issue of hoping that the other 3 children are okay. I mean, that's our next thought process. So we went into delivery. They deliver Adam, and I got to hold him for a while, which was great. And then we thought it was successful. We had to wait 45 minutes, is what they said, roughly around 45 minutes. It's not that calculated, but they said around 45 minutes. If you get to that marker, we're successful with the internal delivery. You'll be fine. The other kids can stay there. It'll be good to go. I'm like, perfect. This is great. We go in. Adam's delivered. And my wife and I are thinking like, oh, please just, make this last. 45 minutes goes by. We thought we were in the clear. The doctor said, you're good to go. We're going to we already had another room for my wife to go upstairs. And then the doctor had left to tell the attending physician that the internal delivery was a success. And then they came in and checked Ellen about 45 minutes later, and she had dilated a little bit more. Because of that, they had to deliver the other 3 children C-section. So it immediately went from they cleaned out the whole OR, bring everything back into the OR now. So, all the doctors, all the nurses, everyone comes rushing back in. The other 3 children were ready to come to this world, no matter how you sliced it, they were ready to go. So it worked out really well. The rest of the pregnancy, from at least the pregnancy standpoint, went well. I mean, Ellen did good. They immediately rushed the babies into the NICU. So NICU is the neonatal intensive care unit, and they all get incubators. And I think at one point, some of them were breathing. You could hear some crying, whatever it may be. I had tried to get up to be a little bit a part of that. My wife wanted me right by her side, so I kind of hung tight. We had held Adam together for a while. We were waiting for the other 3 children to be born, and then that's kind of where it went. And from that moment on, we kind of view Adam as our hero in the sense of hanging on as long as he did to make such a successful path for the other 3 that way.
He was a little hero.
Absolutely.
Wasn't he?
That's how we view it.
And
so
he's still a hero.
absolutely.
And he always will be all your lives.
So then you go on the road of the NICU PICU. So there's another whole new chapter in the life of like, geez, we just want to get pregnant and have a family, and now we're in the NICU, and all 3 children were born under 2 pounds. So Madison was. We had a pound and a half, we had a pound and a half, a pound and 3/4, and just under 2 pounds on the birth of the 3 children. Matthew was the biggest, at birth, but still, I mean, you're talking 2 pounds and pound and a half. They were smaller than a Beanie Baby. I mean, I have photos of them laying next to a Beanie Baby, and and the Beanie Baby is actually bigger than them. So it's really just a moment of like. But again, you don't know what normal is either. I've never had a child. I don't know. I mean, my friend tells me his baby was 6 or 7 pounds, but I don't know. My baby's a pound and a half. So
my baby's like a bag of sugar.
Exactly, right? So, the Tufts Floating Hospital was amazing. I mean, they were really good staff. They did really great by my children and by us. But we pretty much took up our own little wing. I mean, there was one little area down there. We had the 3 little incubators going on. We get to get down and, take a look and, spend some time with them. It's a delicate stage because they're hooked up to ventilator tubes. They're hooked up to wires, and they're monitoring, everything they can. They're trying to keep like a blindfold over them to avoid, various different, things that are unhealthy for them at that stage of the game. And you're not allowed to really take them out of the incubators, at least for a while until they kind of get adapted to their, environment and the whole bit. So, we had started down that path of, every day we get out of the NICU and try to hang with the 3 of them as much as we could. And, it got really interesting at that point because Cameron immediately started to show some immediate needs that I guess everyone was kind of unprepared for, and you need a little bit more attention that way from the docs. So he wasn't doing very well out of the gate, especially in the NICU. So immediately Cameron needed surgery. So
he did.
He did, and that's where things started to get really difficult for Cameron at that point. I think it was the second moment. I shouldn't say think, because I remember it clearly. It was definitely the second moment that I had my moment of just emotional breakdown is when Cameron needed to go in for surgery. And although it doesn't make me emotional to think about it now, in the sense of the tears and the crying, it was the first time I had felt that sense of being a dad and wanting to protect your children from any type of harm around them. So Cameron had, at that point, and not to describe all of it, but from there until now, Cameron has had 12 surgeries and 3 medically induced comas, and he had a trach for 5.5 years of his life. The start of that was all based on this surgery and this operation as what started that process down the road. And he had a valve between his heart and his lungs that didn't close. And it's a PDA, it's a valve that's supposed to in utero stay open so for the amniotic fluid to pass through the body. And then upon birth, that valve was supposed to close and stop blood from dumping into your lungs. Cameron's valve did not close. So the 3 of them were on ventilators, the 3 were on feeding tubes, and then Cameron needed to have his surgery. And the doctor had come in and tried to talk to us through it a little bit, you know, and just kind of told us the likelihood of Cameron surviving. I think you meet a lot of doctors and a lot of nurses, and I've been in the healthcare field for a long time. You meet some people that are a little more blunt with less bedside manner, and some people that are more warm and caring with a lot more bedside manner. I don't know if I pick one better than the other. I enjoyed the fact that the doctor didn't try to paint a pretty picture of it. You know, I enjoyed that he was pretty blunt with us. I didn't necessarily like it at the time, but I think it prepared us for the fact that Cameron was going to have a serious surgery, and not to, you know, I wanted to make sure that we took that as serious as we did that way and understood the risks. So I kind of enjoyed the fact that it was like that. You know, I mean, it doesn't make you feel warm and cozy when he tells you that there's a great chance that he's not going to make it. But, you know, at that point, at least, you know, out of the gate, you're setting yourself up for maybe being prepared for some, you know, good news or bad news, you know what I mean? So.
Now, what about Madison and Matthew? How were they making out through all this turmoil that Cameron was involved in?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was interesting because I think, and I remember 2 or 3 distinct conversations in the beginning of the process. One of them being the fact that earlier on, which I had described when the doctor had told us about, you know, the children surviving, there was another distinct moment in where my wife and I were chatting about just moving forward, how we felt about all this chaos. And I remember her and I saying to each other, and I think both of us kind of, you know, really inputted a lot on this, was just, you know, our children can't speak, and they can hear the tone of our voice, granted, but they don't understand the words we're saying. So we made a distinct decision to make sure that we weren't walking into the room nervous, we weren't walking into the room upset. We needed to make sure that everything they felt from us, from every touch to every tone of our voice to every prayer we said together or whatever we did, that they heard nothing but that comfort of a parent. And I wanted that comfort to be in a good light too. So we tried to keep a happy tone to what was going on. And I feel like that really impacted, you know, the children a lot. And you could see the difference in the way that their vitals were looking, like their heart rate, respiratory rate. You know, a lot of these things would change dramatically when we were holding them. So we used to be able to kangaroo the children. So even though Cameron was really sick and had that surgery, we weren't able to hold Cameron as much just due to that surgery that he had had. Whereas Madison and Matthew, my wife and I used to get to go in, and Cameron got a lot of this too, but out of the gate, Madison and Matthew get a lot more, where you get to kangaroo. And you kind of open up your shirt, and they want direct skin-on-skin contact. So they would take the babies out. They're hooked up to a bunch of wires, but you get to open up your shirt a little bit, and you lay back in the recliner, and they just kind of rest against your chest that way. And those are the moments I felt like we were really connecting and helping them understand that, you know, mom and dad are there for you. You know,
it's all about the bonding.
Yeah, so
I know.
So they were progressing fine. They thought Matthew may have needed surgery at one point. He happened to not need it. That PDA ligation, the valve that did not close in Cameron. A lot of the nurses had thought that it was still open in Matthew, but Matthew did not need that. And Matthew came off the ventilator pretty quickly. And I think due to him being A, the heaviest, and B, coming off the ventilator pretty quickly, is probably the reason why Matthew had and what I mean by easy, he spent 3 months in the ICU as well, right out of birth, but the easiest path out of the three was probably Matthew's path, and I think it was due to the fact that he didn't have a lot of other complications that Madison and Cameron had, so.
Right. So now they left the hospital at some point, and they've been growing up all this time. How
Yeah.
old are they now, Ed?
They're 8.
8 years old, my goodness, and they're doing well.
Yeah, I mean, now they're great. You know, I mean, we have a lot of fun, you know, hanging out and doing our stuff. I think it was definitely, you know, leading up to that with the fact that, you know, the next 2 years after, the 2 years after birth, you know, leading up to coming home was probably some of the more difficult times, just due to the fact that, you know, Cameron was in the hospital for 2 years, the first 2 years of his life. So he spent 2 years in the ICU. Matthew was in for 3 months. Madison was in for 6 months. Madison had you know, a few lung collapses herself. So they put her on a special ventilator when you have a lung collapse, and the ventilator, you know, pushes air into the lungs, and then your lungs work on, you know, negative airway pressure. It's meant to suck in rather than be pushed in. And this ventilator they put her on, even though it would help her, you know, survive and do well and thrive, you know, caused a lot of damage on the inside of her lungs, as the same it did with Cameron. So those were the biggest issues we had, even when they came home, was that initial, you know, and we dealt with pretty much the same issues they dealt with in the hospital. They were just a little bit more stable when they came home at first. Because for the 2 years Cameron was in, he was very unstable, and that's why we had tried to take him home once or twice, and it just was unsuccessful, just due to the fact that he was very unstable with the lung collapses. And, you know, he had a few moments where there were 3 moments the doctors had told us to drop everything you're doing, you know, and rush to the hospital. And we had 3 moments where, you know, when we went in there, they said there's just as good a chance that Cameron survives that he does not survive. So there were 3 moments in there that we were pretty scared, rushing down from wherever we were, jobs, my wife shopping, that we'd have to fly down to the hospital and, you know, and just be there for him. He was in a medical induced coma, just due to the fact that he was on a special ventilator, that if he would have breathed on top of the ventilator, his lungs could have burst. Yeah. So to avoid the bursting of the lungs, they'd medically, you know, induce him and keep him comatose. So there were 3 or 4 times that had to happen as well.
Well, you must have had tremendous support from family, friends during all this time?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think the first, I have a great family, and we have great extensions of the family on both sides of the equation. So from that side, if I ever needed anything, I knew everyone was there in the drop of a hat. That being said, I've always been kind of a workaholic anyway, so I like to just kind of plow through and, you know, work as hard as I can, and I don't always ask for help, maybe on sometimes that we should have. So, but yeah, you know, great support. A lot of people came down. I think, you know, outside of the family side, there were a lot of nurses that had asked us, you know, that had nominated us for either a Make-A-Wish Foundation or put our names up on the Christmas tree for a donation or whatever it may be. So there, outside of just my family, there were a lot of people that gave toys to the hospital that ended up, you know, coming into Cameron's room and Madison's room and Matthew's room. And I remember them all getting Beanie Babies and covers for their incubators, and there was a ton of support that went across the board that way.
It's so wonderful. People really rise to the occasion when the need is there.
Yeah, and that's some of that drives as to why I'm part of the community and Rotary and things in the community now, because I can't find all those people to give back to them that gave to us. So that's my way of trying to give back to some other people.
It's all about giving back, isn't it?
You know, for us it definitely is, especially through some of the scary moments we went through.
It's wonderful. Well, Ed, I'd love to meet these children someday. Do you think that would ever be possible? Do you think that we could ever have you back here sometime so we could introduce the children and your wife to our audience?
Well, as much as I'd love to come back, Alan, I definitely will come back to say hello. I think, you know, I could probably make that happen, you know, in the very near future. As a matter of fact, I think I might be able to hear some footsteps outside the door right now.
You know, I think you might be right, Ed. Do we have some visitors here that we could bring in? I did actually bring my grandmother, my wife, and my children with me, Gail, to say hello. Let's meet them.
What's up, buddy?
Oh.
Whoa. What's up, Madison?
Happy Father's Day.
Look at that. Can you guys say hi?
Hi. Hello.
Whoa. Bubbles? Did you get the bubbles for me or for you? Exactly. I know you get bubbles for.
It's really tricky because you're going to give it to us.
I am. It looks like a lot of the sidewalk chalk looks like it's going to go to you too, I think. I get a present too?
Yeah.
Is this another present that I think we'll have to give to you?
No.
No. It's an actual present for me this time?
Yeah.
What do I got?
I'm not sure.
Can we find out what your names are?
Matthew,
You're Matthew
Cameron, and Madison.
and Madison. Well, you're all so
This is
wonderful.
only for you,
Good
Dad.
children.
Whoa.
And where's your mom? Is she here too?
Look at that.
Could you ask her to come over and visit?
So this is my
here
wife,
we have
Ellen.
Ellen.
Yes, thank you.
Ellen, thank
Good
you
to
so
see you.
much for being
you're
here with
welcome.
us today.
Thank you very
But
much
you
for
can
having us.
tell us alike because we like different things.
Right.
And we also have another special guest here, I understand.
Yes.
And this is Meme Celebracy.
Yes, this is my
Mary Jo
Meme.
Celebracy, your
Yep.
beloved grandmother.
Absolutely.
Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here.
You guys all want to say hi? Say hi to everyone.
Can you give a little wave to the camera?
You know, out of all the things that we do as a family, usually we have some quirky little funny things that we like to do or say together. But one of the things that Matthew's come up with that we'd like to share as a family, because a long time ago we used to do, you know, on the I love you sign, and then the I love you sign we used to try to touch our fingers together like this. But then what happened was Matthew came out with an amazing one that we share as a family
What
that we
is
do
it?
every night after our prayers, right? You want to
marks
share,
the
Matthew?
love,
X
spread
marks
the
the
love.
love. So we do X marks the love, and we say spread the love.
Oh,
Right?
that's
so
what it's all
triplets,
about.
let's do an
spreading
X marks the love. Let's give GAIL and WCAT an X marks the love, guys.
I like
Yeah,
this
hey,
thing.
X marks the love. Not me, them. Turn around. X marks the love, spread the love.
Spread the love. Well, this
Do we get to see
concludes
Meme too?
our
No or no?
this concludes our show for today. And
This.
I'm GAIL LOWE, and the host of Family Album. And if you'd like to appear on the show with me, I'd love to interview you and talk about your story. And at the end of the show, there's an email address that will roll across the screen. And if you're interested in coming on, just email me and I'll take care of the rest. Thank you so much. And again, happy Father's Day, Ed.
Thank you, thank you.